One of my favorite books is The Song of the Bird. It's by Anthony DeMello. He is a Jesuit priest. It is a collection of wisdom tales from the world's religions that are as profound as any I have read, and I want to share one this morning. Uwe the Sufi was once asked, "What has grace brought you?" He replied, "When I wake up in the morning, I feel like a man who is not sure he will live until evening." Said the questioner, "But doesn't everyone know this?" Said Uwe, "They certainly do, but not everyone feels it." At the end of this tale, Anthony DeMello adds, "No one ever became drunk on the word wine." This morning I will add, no one ever solved the problem of climate change by talking about it. In October 2012, I shared the words of Eboo Patel, a Muslim author and activist who spoke at General Assembly, the yearly June meeting of Unitarian Universalists. For me, one of the most poignant points in Patel's words is when he spoke to the importance of interfaith work. He was clear. There will continue to be areas of disagreement between faiths, but that absolutely must not detract us from finding common goals and making partners and allies of our interfaith brothers and sisters. Since I gave that sermon almost 4 years ago, a tremendous opportunity has come to Unitarian Universalists. On March the 13th, 2013, an extraordinary event occurred. I believe it is one that can and ought to shape the work of Unitarian Universalism for years to come. The event I am referring to is the beginning of the papacy of Pope Francis in the Roman Catholic Church. Pope Francis has been bringing fresh ideas to the Catholic Church, including just yesterday, if you saw in the news what he did, bringing refugees with him back to Italy. What an amazing testimony, an amazing individual. Now, the ideas that Pope Francis is bringing may not always be in complete alignment with Unitarian Universalism. But what the heck? If you have two Unitarian Universalists in the same room, they will not be in complete alignment. 2 years after becoming Pope, just 10 months ago, Pope Francis released his 40,000-word papal encyclical. Encyclical, by the way, is a letter intended for wide circulation. His encyclical had the subtitle, "On Care for Our Common Home." It is not titled, "On Dominating the Earth and Its Creatures." It is titled, "On Care for Our Common Home." You get an idea of what's coming. It's an extraordinary document. In my letter to the editor of the Marietta Daily Journal last June, just days after he released the encyclical, I wrote, "The first paragraph of the encyclical is a beautiful rendering of our intimate relationship with the earth. And the second paragraph grieves my heart as it calls out our human responsibility in environmental degradation." Other sections speak to access to water, the effects of consumerism, the disproportionate impact on the poor, the importance of ecosystems and living in harmony with the earth, justice between generations and between nations, the principle of the common good, action needed by international, national, and local communities, a respectful relationship between religion and science, ecological education, and the link between spirituality and quality of life. Did I say this was an extraordinary document? There is clearly momentum, I believe, building for our need to take climate change seriously. Last December, there was a significant agreement reached at the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris. Now, I must confess that I feel inadequate evaluating the Paris Agreement. But here is what I understand. First, the agreement represents the consensus of 195 countries. This isn't a majority vote. This is consensus, agreement among 195 countries. Second, there was the recognition that the original target of limiting global temperature increase by 2 degrees Celsius was insufficient. The Paris Agreement instead agrees to pursue efforts to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's a huge change. There is testimony of island states like the Seychelles and the Philippines that have their very existence threatened. And those at the conference listened to this impending problem that's coming, and they made this change. They listened. Amazing. Third, there are no penalties for noncompliance, only a system of public encouragement. That's how I understood it. Now, it is easy to get cynical on this last part, and yet on March 31st, just 2.5 weeks ago, the presidents of China and the United States, those who produce the most greenhouse gases in our environment, the presidents of those two nations made a joint announcement that they will sign the agreement this Friday, Earth Day, April 22nd. My question to all of us this morning, to myself included, will the United States have the political will to follow through? Despite these extraordinary documents, initiatives, and agreements, I have serious concerns about what is happening in Georgia and our local community. Last October, Georgia joined 24 other states aimed to block President Obama's climate change regulations, also called the Clean Power Plan. And as you may know, we have many political leaders in our state who see little, if any, urgency in addressing the human contribution to climate change. In Atlanta, I am particularly concerned with our continued preference for automobiles rather than more sustainable forms of work and transportation. You may be aware that we are in the middle of building the Northwest Corridor, just 2 miles from my house. 30 miles of reversible toll lanes on I-75 and I-575. What I did not realize before writing this sermon is that it is part of an even larger future project affecting all of the highways in every part of Atlanta. The will to address or even acknowledge climate change does not seem to be present. In preparing for today, I read a second inspiring text. It was Mark Horn's sermon last year where he explained climate change with words and a PowerPoint presentation that reminded me of Arlo Guthrie's 27 8x10 colored glossy pictures with circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one. It was wonderful. In his sermon, Mark raised concerns about the public's indifference on climate change, and I share his concern. For many, it is often difficult to confront a new reality that disagrees with the status quo, with the way that we're used to doing things or that we may have invested interests in. And this is why the Pope's leadership and the encyclical that he issued are so significant, because it's a change from what has been said in the past. In the recent struggle for marriage equality and recognition of sexual orientation and gender identity, while there is still much work to be done, I believe I've learned some things about how change in attitudes occurs or doesn't occur. There is good news, and I think there is bad news. The difficult news, the bad news, is that change is much less likely to happen unless someone is personally affected, unless they personally feel the pain. In August of 2013, I gave a sermon about how United States Senator Rob Portman changed his view on sexual orientation only after he learned that his son was gay. And perhaps the better known example is former Vice President Dick Cheney, whose views changed after he learned his daughter is gay. What is difficult for me is that the testimony of others had such little impact on politicians. It had to be their own child. It had to be personal before they were willing to consider a different point of view. Sadly, changes in the Arctic, loss of habitat, rising sea levels, and unprecedented consensus among scientists are slow to influence many. And waiting for people or communities to be personally devastated when it has to get personal, devastated by climate change, to simply wait until that happens, to me is unconscionable. What I find more hopeful is that there was and is a second factor for changing attitudes regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. It is that youth have been more accepting. And so I am hopeful that as youth are more willing to accept the reality and the responsibility of climate change, we will see greater and greater interest in this issue. The question that we must now address is, what can we be doing to address climate change? To set the stage, let me share what happened at the March meeting of the Sierra Club chapter that meets at Life University here in Marietta. The presenter was Dr. Kim Cobb from the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech. Dr. Cobb's program explored the harsh impact that climate change is having on weather patterns, El Nino in particular, but also the coral reefs. After making her presentation about her research, which requires travel for her research team, her graduate students, to far off remote islands in the Pacific, she was asked how she justified using so much fossil fuel in support of her research. Her answer was quite simple. She offers a contest to her students in which her students help companies in Atlanta reduce their carbon footprint. One group of students was recently recognized at the White House for their innovation. And so her research program has a net positive impact on the environment. Don't you love her innovation? But let's bring it closer to home. What can we at Emerson be doing to seriously address climate change? I want to follow up on Dr. Cobb's example and ask what we at Emerson can do to make our coming together have a carbon footprint of 0. We are already doing part of the work. It was once a source of great amusement, if not consternation, that diversity in a UU congregation was found in the different color Priuses in our parking lot. Today I suggest, or I suspect, that we have a higher percentage of electric vehicles in our parking lot than virtually any other faith. But what more can we do? What I did not mention about Mark Horn's presentation last year was his proposal that we use solar panels here at Emerson. That, I think, would be walking the talk. But let me put a few other ideas on the table. I dare say that every person here recycles at home. But did you know that they do not pick up recycling here at Emerson? They don't. And so we are looking for a team of 5 to 6 people so that each Sunday one member of the team will take the recycling home with them. If you're interested, there is a sign-up sheet on the clear podium on this corner of the dais. We need 5 or 6 people to do this simple act of recycling. And what if we required that recycling be a mandatory component of every event held at Emerson? It not always is. What if we made it part of our policy? And what if we agreed that we would never bring styrofoam into this building? And I'm sure there are dozens of additional ideas. What I am suggesting is a greater personal commitment to addressing climate change right here at Emerson. We could then promote ourselves as an environmentally responsible congregation. I want to return to the idea with which I began this sermon. No one ever got drunk on the word wine, and no one ever solved the problem of climate change by talking about it. I don't want us to talk about climate change. I want us to feel our commitment to address perhaps the greatest challenge facing this generation. And that feeling has to come from within us. We cannot express concern about the lack of effort by others if we ourselves are not doing the very best we can. May we be inspired by Pope Francis, who was himself inspired by St. Francis of Assisi. And may we bring that inspiration to every part of our lives. May it be integral to who we are, to our actions here at Emerson, to our actions at home, at work, and at play. May we here at Emerson be a beacon to our community, to our state, and to our nation. May we be that example of walking the talk and of feeling what it means to truly care for our common home. May it be so.